Good morning, good afternoon. Today we are going to be finishing up our unit on uh, economic indicators, looking at inflation. Y'all, once again, I forgot to change the standard. That is my bad. I'm sorry, I forgot to change it again. But it says our objectives for today, the students will be able to explain the definition of inflation, understand the types of inflation, and describe how inflation helps to examine the health of the economy. So we're looking at the overall health of the economy based on what is going on in our money supply. And so if you see the Federal Reserve here, guys, remember the Federal Reserve is the one that is responsible for controlling inflation rates. We talked about that when we talked about the Federal Reserve. They are responsible for controlling inflation rate, the inflation. They have policies in place. Remember that if money supply gets too numerous, then there are certain things they can do. If it is not numerous enough, or there's not enough money in supply, then there are things that they can do for that as well. We're not going to rehash that. We talked about that when we talked about the Federal Reserve. But I do need you to remember that the Fed, remember short for the Federal Reserve, is responsible for the inflation rate of our currency. They manipulate the price stability in order to ensure freedom from inflation. That is one of our economic goals. Freedom from inflation, economic growth. That is responsible. The Federal Reserve is partly responsible for controlling that policy. All right, so first off, you're thinking, what in the world, Miss Harris, is inflation? Well, I am so glad you asked, my lovelies. Inflation is a general and sustained increase in the average price of all products in the economy. So it's an increase in prices. All right, it is an increase in prices, and there are a lot of things that play into the rise in prices. A general and sustained increase in the prices of all products in the economy. That is inflation. So spending more for the same item next year than you did this year. But what we in economics are concerned about is the rate of inflation, the inflation rate, and that is the percent of change. How much did that price go up? If it went up from $1 to $1.10 in the store, and I'm not talking about because of taxes, if that dollar item goes up to $1.10, that's 10% inflation. Thinking, Miss Harris, it's just 10 cents. Yeah, it doesn't seem so bad on $1, but what about $100? That's $10. What about $1,000? What about a home that's $100,000? Okay, you see how that percentage makes a big difference depending on the price of the product. All right, so it's not just looking at how much did the item cost last year versus this year. We've got to look at that percentage of change. Normal rate of inflation is anywhere from 1 to 3%. That is the normal rate of inflation. Okay, in economics, we actually call that creeping inflation. That is our first type or level of inflation, creeping inflation. So generally that dollar item goes up to $1.01. No big deal, right? No big deal. Even if it's $1.03, it's still no big deal. Okay, and I want you to look at the speed. If you noticed, these indicate speed. You're thinking, Miss Harris, no, it don't. Well, yeah, it does. If I'm creeping along, that's what we say about people on the interstate, right? They're just creeping along. Creeping along, creeping along. Yeah, that means indicates how fast they're going, right? They're just creeping along the interstate. Well, what we're looking at here is how fast, or rather how much, how fast, that's better. How fast is the inflation of that goods taking place? So 1 to 3% we're okay with. That's the average rate of inflation in the United States in a given year is 1 to 3%. No big deal. Things cost more, right? Minimum wage goes up. Maybe it is the cost of making the product goes up. Talking about your natural resources, things like that make a difference on the cost of an item. Average costs go up a little bit. It's going to cost more to make the item, right? Walking inflation. Okay, you got some people who are fast walkers and some people who are slower walkers, right? Thinking about people on a walking track, you got some people who are just kind of walking along, just taking in the sights. And then you got people who are speed walking, right? All right, that's this. Walking inflation, 4 to 10%. 4 to 10% is walking inflation. We start to worry in the economy when we get to this stage. All right, you're thinking, but that's still not bad, Miss Harris. It can be, especially when you creep up to this 10% inflation rate. Galloping, thinking about a horse on horse, thinking about somebody on horseback, right? This is typically for unstable economies, y'all. Unstable economies. This is not something that we would see necessarily in the United States. All right, countries that their money supply is not stable, the country is maybe in a political uproar. That's where you're going to see galloping inflation, which is 10 to 30%. And then the mother of all inflations, 500% or above, is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation. I cannot think of a time, guys, in the United States where we've ever seen this. All right? But something worse than inflation, guys, is deflation. A decrease in the prices of goods. You're thinking, wait, Miss Harris. How is a decrease bad? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so here's why a decrease in prices over a long period of time, guys, is bad. What did we start to see is that it causes a recession. Companies are going out of business as prices go down a lot. If we see a decrease in prices, then we're going to see companies start going out of business. We're going to have employees laid off. And those things are spiraling, or part of what spirals down in our business cycle. Keep in mind those peaks and troughs that we talked about in the business cycle. The deflation of price will actually lead to that recessionary period when we start to see a decrease in our GDP. We start to see a rise in inflation and a rise in unemployment, and part of that can be stemmed back from deflation. Now, part of it is going to be, it could be economic, in the sense of things like, I don't know, a pandemic can cause that as well, but deflation is one of the reasons for a long and severe recession. And remember, we call those depressions. Depressions. A severe recession is a depression. Now, whether it is the Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s or 29, 30s, or it is a minor recession like we saw back in the 80s, it is still a recession. All right? Then stagflation, a period of non-economic growth. Okay, where we're just not growing as an economy. This doesn't happen very often in the United States, y'all. Okay? It's out there. It's a category of inflation, but we do not see it very often. Now, how do we know what the price of goods are? Well, we have what we can call the Producer Price Index. Producer Price Index. So this lets the government measure specific groups of goods used by businesses. Maybe it is copy machines. Maybe it's typewriters. Maybe it is cash registers. Maybe it is computers for the company. They're looking at specific items specific items used by businesses to tell what the inflation of those goods is. Okay, we're going to see the producer side, we're going to see the supply side, and the demand side. So this would be the supply side of inflation, right? We have to know what's going on in businesses, where the inflation's occurring, is it occurring, and by how much. Not only do we see the producer, I told you we're going to see the consumer side. Y'all, the consumer price index is what we're worried with. These are household items that we buy. Typically it's 100 items, hundreds of items, that they look at in the areas of food, transportation, clothing, and they monitor those changes in price from year to year. That is how we know how much the percentage is. We're not just picking a random item, guys. It does not change. The items that they measure does not change. It actually stays the same because you're not going to get an accurate read of inflation if you change which goods you're looking at. That's not good data collecting. You have to use the same items every year. And we're going to look at that when we do the 12 days of Christmas. We're going to be looking at the consumer price index for the 12 days of Christmas. All right, so we can see how much it's changed from year to year. All right, causes of inflation. Monetary growth. When real GDP grows, when the money supply, having too much money in supply at one time, is faster than our GDP. Okay, so we got way too much money for the amount of goods that we've actually sold. That's going to be a cause of inflation. Okay, demand pull inflation is where we come in. It's a rise in prices because of consumer demands. Think about Jordans. Jordans is a great example. Are you going to see those Jordans on sale when they first come out? Well, they might be a little, but what happens if too many people start buying those Jordans? They're going to push that price up and up and up and up to keep the excessive amount of demand down. Now we know they make a list that some of them they make a limited number and a limited in the sizes, right? Okay, Miss Harris knows enough about Jordans to know that because I had a kid who used to work at the Foot Locker. Was it Foot Locker? Anyway, the expensive shoe store in the mall. But they're going to push the price of goods up to slow demand. Remember, cost push, demand pull. We're pulling those prices up because the demand is too high. All right. Then cost push is our next cause of inflation. Resources just cost more, guys. And that's where the labor, the minimum wage, and the natural resources, our capital cost, come in. Prices have to go up because when these items go up, there's no way around it. They're going to push those costs off on the consumer, and that actually makes it a little less of a blow to the businesses, which that doesn't seem great for us because we're paying more, but it actually keeps the number of employees they have to let go or the shifts they have to cut down to a minimum. All right, so it does help even though we wouldn't think so. Now, why is inflation bad? What are the effects? The first one is reduced purchasing power. Remember, if prices go up and I'm on a fixed income, like Miss Harris is, remember I told you I'm on a fixed income. I can't make more to work more to make more because of me being on salary. Then I am going to end up being hurt by inflation because I cannot work more. My parents, maybe it's your grandparents who are on a fixed income on Social Security. They are not going to be able to work more to make more, guys. So they are going to be hurt by the inflation rate going up or down. Well, excuse me, going up. They're not hurt if it goes down, which remember we said deflation is actually a bad thing. But they are the ones, we cannot purchase as much, they cannot purchase as much with the income that we have coming in. Okay, so it's going to be very harmful to those of us on a fixed income. All right? It changes our spending patterns. So, instead of buying that high-priced item in the grocery store, maybe we go for the substitutes. We've talked about that before, remember? When we talked about supply and demand, substitutes and complementary goods. We switch from that name brand, store brand item, name brand item, Del Monte, and we switch to Great Value instead. Maybe it is we give up going out to eat because the cost of groceries has gone up a little bit. We don't go out to eat quite as much to compensate. Maybe instead of buying clothes at Macy's, Dillard's, wherever you guys like to shop, we go to the thrift store and purchase items instead. Okay, or going to yard sales. Okay, so it alters our buying pattern. Okay, it encourages speculation. Yeah, I have not taught y'all about speculation because we did not have time to actually look at investment, and it's not covered in my textbook anyway. But speculation, guys, is nothing more than taking a gamble on what is going to happen with maybe it's real estate, maybe it's stocks, bonds. Okay, so people are more likely to buy items like a new home during that time period. Okay, and then distribution of income. We start to see, guys, where the lenders are going to be much less likely to loan money to people who need it. Maybe it's because they have lost their job and they just need to borrow some money from the bank. But inflation, in a time of inflation, lenders are going to be less likely to loan money to the people who need it. Okay, so it's going to hurt the people in that way as well. Okay, well, who is hurt by inflation? All right, we've kind of covered some of this. Lenders. We just talked about that. Savers. All right, I told you Miss Harris loved to save some money, right? All right, but say I save $1,000 this month, and trust me, it's not going to happen. It's Christmas, right? Say I save $1,000 this month. Is that $1,000 really going to be worth the same amount next year as it is when I put it in the bank? No. All right? It's not. Workers without a COLA. COLA is cost of living adjustments. So if I don't get a raise this year, which Miss Harris did not get a raise, but the prices still kept going up, right? Those on Social Security on a fixed income are going to be hurt by inflation more. But who does it actually help? It helps the borrowers. Helps the government and workers that receive COLAs, or cost of living adjustments. Okay, guys, I don't spend a lot of time on inflation because it can get very, very complicated very, very quickly. But I do need you to know what inflation is, and it is a general rise in prices. Now, it is also important to remember that inflation is inevitable. Cost of goods is going to go up from year to year. But it's how much, guys, how much it goes up that makes all the difference. All right? It is how much that makes a difference. Inflation is inevitable, but it's how much that makes the difference. And it is the Federal Reserve that helps keep an eye on the inflation rate in the United States. That ends our unit on macroeconomic indicators. Next class, guys, we're going to be looking at the 12 days of Christmas for 12 days, the cost of the 12 days of Christmas comparing year to year.